Warami, Budjeri Nawunya. Hi, it's good to see you. Naya Gari Sue. My name's Sue. Today we're going to talk about compost. I love compost. Do you know why I like compost? Because it's good for country. It takes all our food scraps that we don't eat and it makes it into good food for the plants on country. Do you compost at home? You might like to answer this poll. Sorry, I should have done it quicker.
Yeah.
You know what? You can make compost in a few different ways. One of the ways is to use a compost bin. I wonder if you can see our compost bin from there. It's over here. Inside here, there's lots of garden scraps and old leaves and also stuff from our kitchen. When you make a compost in a bin like that, one of the best ways to do it is what I call the Lasagna Method, because it's for lazy people. And I like lasagna when I'm lazy. And so what you do is you put in lots of different layers, like a lasagna. Have you ever seen a lasagna when it's cut on its side and you can see the layers? It has a meat layer, it has a pasta layer, and then it has a cheese layer. And then it has a meat layer, a pasta layer, and a cheese layer. And it keeps going like that a few times. And that's what you can do with compost in one of these bins. You can get grass clippings and put in one layer, and it shouldn't be any thicker than, say, your palm on its side. And then you could get maybe a newspaper layer, and that has to be a thin layer, like the pasta. And then you can get food scraps from out of your kitchen, which is what we do here at Barongal from our camp kitchens. And you can put the food scraps in. You can get leaves that you've raked up from the garden and put that in as another layer. And then you do it all again, and you layer it all again. And you can just leave it sit there, and it makes food for the plants. It ends up looking like dirt. You could even add in a few extra things, like the stuff out of your vacuum cleaner or an old cotton sock. And you leave it all in there for about 6 months, and after 6 months this dirt comes out. You may still see the cotton sock though. Another way to do it is to get all those scraps and put them in a big heap in the garden, just in the corner. And you can get a garden fork in and tip it over and mix it maybe once a week. And that makes it what we call a hot compost. And a hot compost, if you go out on a morning like it was this morning, and you can see the steam rising off, you know, kind of like the breath that comes out of your mouth on a cold day. So you can see that steam. And that makes compost quicker. And it will make compost in about 2 months. But you'd probably still see that sock. It takes a while for those socks to break down. Now, the compost that we're going to talk about today is actually worms. And worms do a really, really amazing job of making compost. They make stuff that is what we call nutrient rich. And nutrients means that it's got lots of good things that make plants grow. We have nutrients in our food too, because we get that from the plants, and it helps us grow. Now, I've got to ask you a question. How do you think worms make compost? Maybe you can try and answer the poll that's just going to come up on your screen now. Okay. Well, when we use compost worms, did you know that they're a type of earthworm? They're not the ones that you find in your garden. They're a bit longer and they've got a job too. They actually make air through the soil. And there's some really big compost worms in Gippsland down in Victoria, and they're about that long and about that wide. And apparently if you stand over where they are, you can hear them making blub 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 sounds in the soil. But compost worms, they're small, and I'm going to show you some now. So I've got some here. I'm going to show you them. Can you see those worms? There's lots and lots of worms there. These guys are called red wrigglers. Can you see why they might be called red wrigglers? Yeah, they wriggle. One of the things is if you put them on your hand, we have salt on our hand and they're not real keen on that. So red wrigglers, their babies are tiny and pink. There's another type of compost worms that you sometimes see, and they are tiger worms. Can you guess why they might be called tiger worms? Stripes, you say? Yep, you're right. They've got stripes on them. That's how you can tell they're tiger worms. And their babies are white when they're born, when they hatch out of their little eggs. And sometimes people think they're maggots in their garden, but in their compost, but they're actually just the tiny little worms. Now these compost worms are amazing. Can you? Oh, did you guess what it was that you were going to say how they made it? Well, see all this brown stuff? That's actually worm poo. Worms can eat as much as they weigh in 48 hours. If you did that, you'd be spending a lot of time in the toilet. They do too. They make this worm poo. And sometimes you can see some yellow stuff glistening on the outside of the worm, and that is their wee. So compost from worm farms is made from poo and wee of worms, and if we use the scientific words, that's feces and urine. So what we have here is our big worm farm at Barongal. We made this with an old bath from our principal's house, and it actually allows all the worm wee to drain out the hole, which is right down underneath, and Kate might just be able to get a picture of that, into a bucket so that the worms don't drown in their wee. And it'd be a horrible way to go, wouldn't it? So this is our worm farm. You can make worm farms a whole lot of different ways, just like this, or you can buy one like one of these from a hardware shop. But all of them have to have a bed, and worm farmers always say that the worms have to have a happy bed. So what we've got today is we're going to make our own little worm farms out of bottles like this, and we're going to put a bed in the bottom of them for them. And so what I'm going to do is, this is a PET bottle. It's an old water bottle, but you could use a fizzy bottle. And you need to get to put in for their bed some soil. Maybe it can be a bit of good soil from your garden, some potting mix, or it could be a bit of old compost like this bit. So we're going to put that in for their bed. Now, when you have got their bed in there, it's best to give them some food. So we're going to put some food in there. Today we're using some green scraps. So I think there's some spinach and other things in there. And when you do that, you've got to remember that worms are a bit picky in what they eat. Whichever worm farm they're in, you need to leave a few things out. Now remember when I showed you the worm in the first section, their skin is a membrane, and it's very much like the membrane that's on our eye. And things that get into our eye and sting our eyes, they're not really good for the worms, and the worms really don't like it. So who's ever chopped up an onion in the kitchen and had their eyes cry? I've done that lots of times. I did it last night. Have you ever also peeled an orange? Okay. So, and sometimes when you peel an orange, that little squirt of orange juice or acid sort of pops up into your eye, and it can sting your eye. So we don't want to have the worms eating things like citrus, which is oranges, lemons, mandarins, tangelos, all those things that fit into the citrus family. Another thing they don't like, and another thing that I've done that's made my eye hurt, is I've picked up some chilies and I've chopped them up, and then haven't washed my hands and I've rubbed my eye, and I only did that once. You only should ever do that once. It really stings your eye. So chilies, not good for worms. And have you ever been swimming at the beach and felt that salt sting in your eye? Well, salt isn't good for worms either. So if we leave out any of the onion family, the citrus, the chili and the salt, that's fantastic. There's a couple of other things that are best not to go in worm farms as well. That's dairy and meat and oil, because any of those things will make it smell really, really bad. And the worms don't particularly like them. They do love watermelon though. So if you've got any watermelon scraps, feed them those. Now, they also, in these worm farms and in commercial worm farms, they suggest you get a worm blanket. And sometimes you can use newspaper for a worm blanket. Sometimes you can actually use a hessian bag for a worm blanket. But today we're going to use some shredded paper. So the paper goes on like that. And the worms will eat their blanket eventually. I hope you don't eat your blankets. Okay, we're almost finished. What we're going to do is, if you see this, you need to press in the side so that the top will fit on, because this is the other half of the bottle. You push that on like that, and you sit it on quite tight. And there you've got your worm farm. Now, you might be making it along with us today, or you might make it later on. If you make another 2 or 3 of these, you can do an experiment with them. And here at Barongal, we love science. And the experiment you can do is you put one in the sun, one in the dark somewhere, and one maybe in the fridge. But you've got to tell your mum or dad or carer that you've put it in the fridge, otherwise they might get a bit of a surprise. So after a week, you will take them out and have a look at them and compare them. And on our Barongal website, we've got a science experiment sheet for the worms that you can fill out. It's a proper science experiment, and you will need to have your results in there and write out how you did the experiment, how you set it up. And then you can put in a discussion at the end about why you think it's happened that way. But before all that, you actually need to put in your hypothesis, which is a guess about which one will actually break down quickest. So you might say, I think that the one in the dark will break down quickest, or the one in the sun, or the one in the fridge might break down the quickest and become soil as at the quickest time. What you might say is it's not going to change anything. So that might be your hypothesis, that they will all be the same. But when you've finished and you've taken it out and look at it, you need to say whether your hypothesis was supported by your results. Not proved, supported by your results. You might be writing, it wasn't supported by my results. Or you might say it was inconclusive, which means you can't tell what happened. So if you could fill that out and maybe take a photo of your experiment and send it back to Barongal, we would really love to see that, because we love science here at Barongal. And well, that's just about it for today. I'd like to say, everyone, keep on wongling. That's Barongal's way of saying, get out on country any way you can and enjoy it. Yanu.